Breathing takes priority, even before major bleeds. We have to make the call quickly.
What if supplies are low?
We do what we can with what we have.
The parking lot lights buzzed with a dying flicker, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt behind Harborview Regional Medical Center. At 10:47 p.m., a battered sedan pulled into the same spot it had claimed for 11 years. Marina Hofstetler stepped out, her scrubs, bought for $11 from a discount bin 3 towns over, hanging loose against the October chill. She didn't look like someone the world had built plans around. 43 years old, hair pulled back in the same tight knot she'd worn since her first shift, eyes that had seen more suffering than most people witnessed in a lifetime. No one waited for her arrival. No one announced it. And yet, within the walls of that hospital, nothing truly functioned without her. Inside, the emergency department hummed with its usual quiet dysfunction. A single working defibrillator cart, expired supplies tucked behind newer boxes nobody had thrown away, a decontamination station that existed only as a laminated diagram taped to a supply closet door. Marina walked past it all without complaint. She had stopped expecting anything to change. She clocked in beneath a flickering fluorescent light, checked the board, and began the ritual she'd performed thousands of times. Counting beds, checking oxygen tanks, running her fingers along equipment that administration had promised to replace for over a decade. It was tedious. It was invisible. It was the kind of work that made hospitals run and never made headlines. Somewhere above her, in offices with new carpet and closed doors, men in pressed shirts were reviewing quarterly numbers. They knew her name only as a line item, a salary to be trimmed, a request to be denied, a nuisance who kept asking for things the budget didn't allow. None of them knew what was coming. None of them knew that in a few short hours, a training exercise 7 miles down the coast would go catastrophically wrong. That 37 young men, strong enough to survive war zones, would be brought to their doorstep gasping for air. That the difference between a mass tragedy and a miracle would rest entirely in the hands of a woman they had spent years trying to silence. Marina glanced at the clock. 11:02 p.m. She had no way of knowing it yet, but by morning, one decision, hers alone, would either save 37 lives or cost her everything she had left. 11 years earlier, Marina had walked into her first budget meeting with a single sheet of paper and a request that seemed, to her, impossible to refuse. A decontamination cart, fully stocked, for $1,900. Victor Ashcroft hadn't even looked up from his laptop. "We'll revisit it next fiscal year," he said, the same sentence he would repeat, almost word for word, for the next decade. Rosalind Carmichael, seated beside him in a blazer that cost more than the cart itself, had been blunter. "Marina, we're not a military base. We're a community hospital. Chemical exposure protocols aren't exactly our top priority." Marina remembered nodding, thanking them for their time, and walking back to the ER with the same quiet resolve she carried into everything. She didn't argue. She didn't file complaints that would vanish into some administrative void. Instead, she started keeping records. Every denied request went into a folder. Every dismissed drill proposal, every ignored email, every meeting where her concerns were waved away with a tight smile and a promise of next year. She wrote it all down, dated it, filed it. Not out of spite, out of instinct. Some part of her had always known that one day, someone would need to see the truth of what had been asked for and refused. Year after year, the pattern repeated. A used crash cart from a hospital 2 counties over, denied. A half-day training session on hazardous material exposure, denied, citing overtime costs. Even a simple laminated flowchart for mass casualty triage, something she'd offered to design herself for free, approved, then quietly never printed. So she built what she could out of nothing. On her own time, unpaid, she drafted her own decontamination protocol, borrowing language from military field manuals she found in secondhand bookstores. She ran informal drills with a handful of night shift nurses who trusted her. walking them through scenarios in empty hallways after midnight when no one from administration was around to object. She hid extra saline bags and protective gowns in a locked cabinet that officially didn't exist on any inventory sheet. To the hospital's leadership, she was a line item, a recurring request, an inconvenience in scrubs. To the nurses who worked beside her, she was something else entirely. The person who remembered what protocol to follow when the textbooks fell short, the one who stayed calm when everyone else's hands began to shake. She never once believed her diligence would be rewarded. She only believed that someday it would matter. What she couldn't have known was how soon that day would come, or how completely it would upend everything she'd spent 11 quiet years building in the dark. At 11:38 p.m., the radio at the nurse's station crackled to life with a voice stretched thin by panic. Multiple casualties, chemical exposure. Repeat, multiple casualties inbound. ETA 6 minutes. Marina froze for half a second, the kind of stillness that comes right before the body remembers what it was trained for. Then she moved. The dispatcher's voice kept coming, fractured by static and adrenaline. A nighttime training exercise along the coastal facility had gone wrong. A ruptured containment line, chlorine gas venting into a confined space faster than anyone could react. Dozens of commando trainees caught in the cloud before evacuation protocols even finished activating. How many? Marina asked, snatching up the radio. A pause. Then, we don't know yet. Could be 20. Could be more. She looked at the empty bays around her. For nurses on shift, one physician, a single decontamination station that existed only because she'd built it herself. Off the books, in a supply closet no one from administration had inspected in years. The nearest hospital with a proper hazardous materials unit was over an hour away by road. There was no time to divert. Whatever came through those doors in the next few minutes would be Harborview's responsibility alone. Ready or not. Outside, the first sirens became visible before they were audible, red and blue light bleeding across the parking lot in pulses. Then came the sound. Not one ambulance, but 3, then 5, then more, engines screaming down the access road in a convoy that shouldn't have been possible for a hospital this size to absorb. Marina's mind moved faster than her feet, cycling through 11 years of protocols nobody had ever approved, drills nobody had ever funded, equipment she'd hidden away because she refused to accept next fiscal year as an answer to a question that couldn't wait. This was it, the disaster she had quietly prepared for while everyone else called her paranoid. The night she had built contingencies for in the dark, unpaid and unthanked, was no longer hypothetical. She turned to the nurse beside her, a younger woman named Priya whose hands had already begun to tremble. Get the card from the East supply closet. The real one. Now. Priya blinked. The one that's not on inventory? That's the one. The first ambulance doors flew open. A wall of chemical odor rolled in ahead of the stretchers. Sharp, acidic, unmistakable. Young men gasped and coughed, some barely conscious, eyes red and streaming, chests heaving for air that wasn't coming easily. Marina stepped forward into the chaos, the only person in the building who had spent over a decade quietly preparing for a night just like this one. The clock above the nurse's station read 11:41 p.m. when Marina made her first call. By 12 o'clock, the entire trajectory of the night and her career would be decided. Poison control, she said into the phone, jamming it between her shoulder and ear as she ripped open a case of protective gowns. Mass chlorine gas exposure, 30-plus patients, need respiratory and dermal protocol confirmation now. The voice on the other end started rattling off dosages and decontamination sequences. Marina repeated each instruction aloud, loud enough for Priya to hear and scribble onto a whiteboard that had, until tonight, only ever displayed shift schedules. Around her, the emergency department transformed. Gurneys lined the hallway 2 deep, young men coughing and wheezing, some clawing at their own throats, panic rising in their eyes as their bodies fought for air that didn't want to come. The smell of chlorine clung to their skin and hair, sharp enough to sting Marina's own eyes from 10 feet away. Triage by breath sounds first, not by rank, not by who's loudest, Marina called out, moving down the line with a stethoscope, sorting men with quick, practiced hands. Green tag if they're talking in full sentences. Yellow if they're struggling. Red if they're not moving air. A young nurse hesitated at the decontamination station, unsure how to run water lines through equipment never designed for mass use. Marina appeared beside her without breaking stride, redirecting a garden hose fitting she'd rigged years earlier. One more piece of the invisible infrastructure she'd built entirely on her own time. Strip and rinse, 30 seconds minimum. Don't let them touch their eyes, she instructed, her voice cutting clean through the chaos without ever rising to a shout. There was something almost hypnotic in her calm, the kind of steadiness that made frightened men stop flailing and start listening. Dr. Bradley Finch arrived mid-crisis. Take one look at the organized triage lines and simply asked, "Who set this up?" "Nobody," Marina said, not looking up from the patient in front of her. "It's not supposed to exist." Minute by minute, the department found its rhythm. For lines went in. Oxygen masks hissed to life. The red-tagged patients, the ones fighting hardest for breath, were moved first, exactly as her hidden protocol dictated. 19 minutes after the first ambulance doors opened, the last of the initial wave lay stabilized on gurneys, oxygen saturation climbing, panic slowly loosening its grip on the room. Marina allowed herself one breath. Just one. That was when the door to the administrative wing swung open, and Victor Ashcroft strode in, still buttoning a shirt he'd clearly thrown on at home. Rosalind Carmichael a step behind him, phone already pressed to her ear. Ashcroft's eyes swept across the overflowing R, the admitted patients, the makeshift decontamination station, the resources being used far beyond anything he'd ever approved. "Who authorized this many admissions?" he demanded. Marina turned to face him, exhaustion and chlorine fumes still burning in her throat. "I did," she said. Ashcroft's jaw tightened as his eyes moved across the crowded department. Every bed filled, every hallway lined with young men still coughing, still recovering, still very much in need of care. 37 admissions, he said, as though the number itself were an accusation. "Do you understand what that does to our overnight census? Our insurance liability? I understand what chlorine gas does to lung tissue 6 hours after exposure," Marina said evenly. "That's what I understand." Carmichael stepped forward, lowering her phone. "We need to start discharging the stable ones. Green tags go home with instructions. Yellow tags we can divert to County General once they're stable enough to transport." "County General is over an hour away," Marina said. "And these men aren't stable. They're stabilized. There's a difference. Explain it to me in numbers we can survive." Ashcroft snapped. Marina held his gaze, unwilling to let exhaustion crack her composure. "Delayed pulmonary edema. Chlorine exposure doesn't finish doing damage the moment the coughing stops. Fluid can build up in the lungs 4, 6, even 10 hours after exposure, long after a patient looks fine. If we send these men home, or ship them an hour down the road, some of them will start drowning in their own lungs somewhere we can't reach them." The room went quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors and the ragged breathing of 37 young men who had no idea their fate was being negotiated feet away. "That's a liability decision, not a clinical one," Carmichael said. "We are not authorized to hold this many patients overnight without executive sign-off." "Then I'm asking for executive sign-off," Marina said. "Right now. In writing if you'd like. But I am not discharging a single one of these men until they've cleared the observation window. If something happens to them after we let them go, that won't just be a lawsuit. That'll be a body count." Ashcroft's face reddened. "You are not authorized to make that call, Marina. You work the floor. You don't run this hospital." Then someone who does needs to get down here and explain to 37 mothers why their sons went home fine and died in their sleep, Marina said, her voice steady even as her pulse hammered beneath it. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The monitors kept beeping. Somewhere down the hallway, A young man moaned in his sleep, still fighting for clean air. "This isn't over," Ashcroft finally said, turning on his heel. "We'll discuss your future here in the morning." Marina watched him go, already knowing what that conversation would cost her. But as she turned back toward the rows of stabilizing patients, she understood something else too. Whatever came next, she would rather lose her job than lose a single one of these men to a decision made by a spreadsheet. By 2 a.m., the emergency department had settled into a different kind of chaos, quieter but no less dangerous. 37 men lay across every available bed and gurney, hooked to monitors that beeped in a soft, uneven chorus.
Breathing takes priority.
The real
even
threat
before major
wasn't
bleeds.
behind them anymore.
We have to make the call
It was
quickly.
still
What
ahead,
if supplies are
hidden
low?
somewhere
We
in
do
the
what we can
hours
with
no
what we
one
have.
could see coming. Marina moved through the rows with a clipboard she'd made herself, checking oxygen saturation levels every 30 minutes, listening to lung sounds with a stethoscope that had heard more crises than most doctors twice her age. Dr. Finch worked the opposite end of the room, and between them, they'd built an unspoken rhythm, a glance, a nod, a shared understanding of who needed watching closest. The commandos, even exhausted and frightened, hadn't lost the instincts their training had carved into them. Men who could barely speak still reached over to check on the trainee in the next bed, murmuring encouragement, tracking each other's breathing the way they'd been taught to track a teammate's six. It was a kind of discipline Marina had rarely seen outside a battlefield. Brothers refusing to let each other fight alone, even flat on their backs in paper gowns. At 2:47 a.m., a young trainee in bed 14 began to change. His oxygen numbers, steady for nearly an hour, started sliding. His breathing, which had eased since arrival, grew shallow and wet-sounding, a crackle building beneath his ribs that hadn't been there 30 minutes before. "Finch," Marina called, already moving. "Delayed onset, bed 14. They worked in tandem. Oxygen increased, positioning adjusted, medication administered exactly as the poison control protocol had specified hours earlier. Within minutes, his breathing steadied. Had he been sent home, had he been on a highway toward County General instead of under careful watch, the outcome might have looked very different. It happened 4 more times before dawn. Bed 6, bed 22, bed 31, bed 9. Each time, the pattern held, stable, then suddenly not, the poison working its slow damage long after the initial crisis seemed to have passed. Each time, Marina and Finch caught it within minutes, because they were watching, because they hadn't discharged a single man on a hospital administrator's timeline. The exhausted night shift staff, some pulled into double shifts without warning, never once complained. They refilled oxygen tanks, changed 4 bags, brought warm blankets to men shivering from shock rather than cold. Somewhere around 4 a.m., one of the younger nurses started quietly humming while she worked, and a few of the commandos, half asleep, found themselves calmed by it. By the time the sun began to rise over the parking lot, all 37 men were breathing steady. 5 of them, without the hours of careful watching Marina had fought to protect, would not have survived to see the morning at all. Marina was still charting vitals on bed 9 when the summons came. A terse message from the front desk that Ashcroft wanted her in his office immediately. She walked upstairs in scrubs stained with the residue of the night's work, too tired to feel nervous, too certain of what she'd done to feel guilty. What she found waiting for her was not gratitude. "Effective immediately. You're suspended pending review," Ashcroft said, not bothering to look up from the paperwork already prepared on his desk. Insubordination, unauthorized admissions, circumventing hospital financial protocol. Marina stood very still. 5 of those men would be dead right now if I'd followed your financial protocol. That's not the determination for you to make, Carmichael said, sliding a folder across the desk. Marina's termination paperwork, dated that morning, as though it had been drafted before the sun even came up. "We've also decided to formally revoke your charge nurse designation, effective today. You're demoting me for saving 37 lives. We're addressing a pattern of behavior," Ashcroft said. "The decontamination equipment you used wasn't on any approved inventory. The protocol you followed wasn't hospital sanctioned. As far as our official records will show, none of what happened last night happened the way you're describing it. Something cold settled in Marina's chest. You're rewriting what happened. We're protecting the hospital, Carmichael said, not quite meeting her eyes. Marina left the office in silence, her badge deactivated before she'd even reached the elevator. By the time she reached the parking lot, word had already started circulating that the unauthorized equipment used the night before would be quietly removed, that incident reports were being redrafted, that her name was being scrubbed from official documentation of a night that had saved 37 lives. But administration had made one mistake. They didn't know about the folder in Marina's car. 11 years of denied requests, dismissed proposals, ignored emails, all dated, all documented, all sitting exactly where she'd left them because some quiet part of her had always known this day might come. She sat behind the wheel for a long moment, hands trembling now that the adrenaline of the night had finally worn off, replaced by something heavier, the particular exhaustion of being punished for doing the right thing. She thought of bed 14, bed 6, bed 22, bed 31, bed 9, 5 young men who would wake up that morning and go on living entire lives, families, careers, futures, because she had refused to follow an order that would have killed them. Whatever the hospital tried to erase, that much could never be undone. She just didn't yet know whether anyone beyond these walls would ever find out the truth. 3 days after Marina's suspension, a phone rang in an office far removed from Harborview's crumbling hallways. A base commander's line, where a report crossing his desk didn't add up. 37 trainees hospitalized after a chemical exposure. 5 confirmed cases of delayed pulmonary edema, caught and treated before they became fatalities. And yet, according to the hospital's official incident report, the equipment used to save them didn't exist, the protocol followed wasn't on file, and the nurse who'd coordinated the entire response had been suspended for insubordination less than 12 hours after the crisis ended. Something about the timeline troubled him enough to make a second call. Within a week, 2 investigators arrived at Harborview Regional Medical Center, credentials in hand, requesting incident reports, staffing logs, and equipment inventories from the night in question. Ashcroft and Carmichael, composed and rehearsed, walked them through a sanitized version of events, a chaotic but ultimately well-managed emergency response, standard protocol, nothing extraordinary. But investigators had already spoken to the men who'd lived it. Trainee after trainee described the same thing. A nurse who moved through the chaos like she'd trained for it her whole life, who called out orders no one else knew how to give, who refused to let a single one of them be sent away before she was certain they'd survive the night. Several of them remembered her name, specifically. None of them remembered anyone from hospital leadership present until well after the crisis had passed. The discrepancy was impossible to ignore. When investigators requested to speak with Marina directly, they found a woman far more prepared than the hospital's polished denials had suggested. She met them not with excuses, but with a folder. 11 years of dated requests for a decontamination cart, drills, emergency protocols, each one stamped, denied, or simply ignored, alongside her own handwritten notes from the night itself, time-stamped call logs to poison control, and a detailed account of the delayed pulmonary edema cases she and Dr. Finch had caught. It was, in the words of one investigator, the most thorough documentation of a preventable failure and a heroic recovery from it that I've seen in this line of work. Word began to spread quickly after that. What the hospital had tried quietly to bury was now the subject of a formal military inquiry, one with the authority to demand answers Ashcroft and Carmichael couldn't simply wave away with budget talk and closed-door meetings. For the first time since her suspension, Marina allowed herself to feel something other than exhaustion. Somewhere, finally, someone was listening, and they weren't going to stop until they understood exactly what had happened that night, and who deserved the blame for what came after. The investigation took 6 weeks. When it concluded, it did so with the force of a verdict no one at Harborview could contain any longer. The findings were laid out in a report that ran nearly 80 pages. A meticulous timeline built from Marina's documentation, cross-referenced against staffing records, poison control call logs, and sworn statements from more than 30 commando trainees who had been in those beds. Every detail she'd quietly filed away for 11 years. Every denied request, every ignored proposal, was now evidence in a case that had grown far larger than she was. The report concluded, in language too precise to argue with, that hospital leadership had knowingly operated without adequate emergency preparedness for over a decade despite repeated, documented warnings from senior nursing staff. It found that on the night of the incident, administrative leadership had attempted to override sound clinical judgment for financial reasons, a decision that, had it been followed, would likely have resulted in multiple preventable deaths. And it found that in the aftermath, hospital leadership had taken deliberate steps to alter incident documentation and retaliate against the employee responsible for the successful emergency response. The words landed like a verdict because in every way that mattered, they were won. Ashcroft resigned within days of the report's release, his letter citing personal reasons that fooled no one who'd followed the story. Carmichael was removed from her position shortly after, the hospital's board citing loss of confidence in leadership in a statement that read, to anyone who understood what had actually happened, like the closest thing to an admission of guilt they would ever offer. Marina learned the outcome not in a boardroom, but standing in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, listening to an investigator read the summary aloud. When he reached the line confirming her full reinstatement, back pay, and formal exoneration from every charge levied against her, she had to sit down. 11 years of being dismissed. 11 years of folders nobody wanted to read. One night that had nearly cost her everything. And now, finally, the truth. Undeniable, documented, impossible to bury, had done what she alone never could. Word of the story spread beyond the hospital's walls within days. Local news picked it up first, then wider coverage followed. The night shift nurse who'd saved 37 commandos, punished for her heroism, vindicated by the very institution that had failed to protect them in the first place. For the men she'd cared for that night, the story confirmed something they'd known since the moment they opened their eyes and saw her steady hands working over them. For Marina, it confirmed something else entirely, that the 11 years she'd spent quietly preparing for a disaster no one believed would come had not been wasted after all. They had simply been waiting for someone to finally take notice. The ceremony took place on a gray morning in early spring, in a room far more polished than anything Marina had ever known inside Harborview's walls. Military officials stood at attention, a small crowd of former trainees, several of whom she recognized from that long, chemical-scented night, sat in the front rows, healthy and whole in a way that still caught in her throat when she let herself think about it too long. When they called her name, Marina walked forward the same way she'd walked into every crisis for 11 years, steady, unhurried, unwilling to let the moment rattle what years of quiet discipline had built in her. The National Defense Merit Award was placed in her hands, its weight heavier than she expected, heavier than any recognition she'd imagined receiving for simply doing the job she'd always believed was hers to do. Harborview's new hospital board had already reinstated her weeks earlier, not merely to her old position, but to a newly created role, Director of Emergency Services, with full authority over emergency preparedness, staffing protocols, and equipment budgets. The same board that had once denied her a $1,900 decontamination cart now approved a complete overhaul of the department's readiness infrastructure without a single objection. It would be easy to call this an ending. In many ways, it was simply a beginning. Marina understood something now that she hadn't fully grasped in her years of quiet, unpaid preparation. That the work she'd done in the dark, filed away and dismissed, unpaid and unnoticed, had never truly been invisible. It had simply been waiting for the moment when it would matter most. That was the nature of the work she'd chosen. Nobody applauded the nurse restocking a cart at midnight. Nobody thanked her for the drills run in empty hallways after visiting hours ended. But when the moment came, and it always eventually did, that invisible labor became the only thing standing between order and catastrophe. She thought often, in the months that followed, about how differently that night could have ended, about the cost of indifference dressed up as fiscal responsibility, about how close 37 young men had come to becoming a tragedy instead of a story of survival, simply because the people in charge had valued a spreadsheet over a warning repeated for 11 straight years. On her first morning back, Marina walked into the emergency department before her shift officially began, the way she always had. But this time, tucked neatly into its designated space near the entrance, sat a fully stocked decontamination cart, funded, approved, permanent. She ran her hand along its edge for a moment, feeling something settle inside her that 11 years of denied requests had never quite allowed. It had taken a tragedy to get it built, but it was there now, and it would be ready the next time someone needed it most.